your lunch. But if it is lunchtime, then we also have an excellent fare spread out for you today through the next speaker, Dr. Yazid Gandhi. If I have to introduce Yazid, I can go on and on, but I'm sure he understands, and I would go to the extent of telling you that if there's any clinician worth his salt and name, simple by nature, with a lot of depth in knowledge and skills in the field of oral surgery, surgical implantology, bone regenerating techniques, biomaterials in bone regeneration, the knowledge of peri-implant tissue, it is Dr. Yazid Gandhi. Yazid brings with him a very high level of expertise. I still recall the first time that we had Yazid on the podium of FAMDent. His entire family and his clinic support staff were there. And after this presentation, they all literally did a small jig of celebration. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Yazid Gandhi. Yazid, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the kind intro. Is everybody able to see the screen? Is the screen visible?
It is to me, yes.
Okay, so here goes. Thank you, Team FAMDent. Thank you, Kumaraswamy sir, for the kind intro. Thank you, Mr. Dusseldorf, and all the people who have worked hard to make this happen. So when I was given this kind invite by Kumaraswamy sir to speak, he said, let's talk about soft tissue augmentation in dental implants. So I have chosen to modify the topic a little bit. From soft tissue augmentation, you will see I have modified it to soft tissue management with respect to dental implants. The reason being, it's not always augmentation that is required. Keep that in mind. You may need to trim it down somewhere. You may need to manipulate it. You may need to shift it, because there may be tissue which is more than adequate required in the area where you don't need it. There may be tissue where you need it, and there may sometimes be thinner tissue, but the thicker tissue is just lying adjacent to it. So soft tissue management or manipulation, if you may please. Now, when I say the options are countless, if you see on your screen, there are many ways to skin a cat. There are many ways to tackle a deficit. There are many ways to tackle an excess. The choice is up to you. The scientific evidence is out there. The literature is out there. Go there and read. Behave like a clinician, not like a technician. So let's start. Why is soft tissue augmentation required in the first place? Was it deficient at the start when you began the case? Did we do something to make it go away? Did it shrink due to tissue, due to disuse atrophy? Or did it shrink with time, with function? If you ask me personally, what is the most important? Number two, did we do something wrong to make it go away? Because fortunately or unfortunately, if you ask me, in my practice, there are many, many, many cases which I see on a day-to-day basis, wherein there are many well-known names which have treated cases. And unfortunately, when the cases come to me, they are in such a state that do what you will. Other than removing the entire implant and starting from scratch, there's not much that you can do about it. So if we don't do anything, it's better rather than doing something wrong. This is what we all desire, don't we? We all desire optimal soft tissue and hard tissue contours which look good. But sometimes what we desire does not match the reality. At times it does, at times it does not. Now you have two pictures on your screen. You have two radiographs on your screen, or two scans, if I may term it, on your screen. On the left is a lady in her 30s. On the right is a lady in her late 20s. Both women extremely socially active. Now you can understand, if you were to fit the bill of the picture on the left, obviously, I do not think you would ever dare to smile. Now the point is, if this was someone else's case who comes knocking at your door, what would you do? We can see that the implants are placed out of the envelope of comfort zone. There's not much that you can do about it, can you? Anything forwards from here will be a compromise. So as I mentioned, if we don't do anything, it's better than doing something wrong. Would you want your case to turn out this way? Certainly not. I don't think anybody would. Soft tissue deficient to start with, on the top left. Immediate implants placed way out of the envelope of comfort and way out of the 3D comfort zone, be it the 3D envelope of bone or be it the comfort zone of the prosthetic rehabilitation arch. There's some tissue shrinkage which you see with time. Soft tissue augmentation in any of these cases is going to be a compromise. Do what you will. Until and unless these implants come out and you start from point zero, you start from the baseline, anything will be a compromise solution. We can keep talking about these cases day in and day out. And in fact, when I have a complications lecture, I don't want to stop because there are so many cases which come to me. Some I am lucky enough to help, some I am not able to help, but then what do? What if this was referred to your practice for a turnaround? Can you turn this around? I cannot, because implant placement is at fault. Okay, the planning is at fault. It is possible that soft tissue was deficient to start with. I do not know, but as of now, it is deficient for sure. On the right side, you see hard tissue augmentation done without any attention to the prevalent thin biotype. Now, if you attempt a block graft with a thin biotype, boy, you're asking for trouble. There is no way around. Is there a cure for all of this? Keratinized component is not that bad on the left one, but it's been made worse because the implant is placed way superior. If I were to guess, I don't know what this was, but if I were to guess, this must have been an immediate implant placement. Most frequently happens with those cases. No amount of soft tissue augmentation here will restore the balance between the optimal biologic and prosthetic outcome. And obviously, if the balance is not restored, the aesthetics is bound to be compromised, isn't it? Now, here again, we see soft tissue problems, barrier exposure, membrane exposure. The bottom picture shows you a resorbable membrane. The picture on the top is a PTFE membrane. Now, the thin phenotype at fault leading to suture line collapse. Again, no attention was given by the clinician to look at the soft tissue before jumping into the hard tissue. Now, what happens with most of us is, when we get our cases, we simply look at the x-rays or the scans. We look into the mouth. Oh, wow, this case has enough bone. Let's plan 2 implants. Let's plan 3 implants. Let's plan 1 implant. But many a clinician misses out. Does this have enough soft tissue to keep the bone where it is or to keep the bone where you want to build it? Right? So in these, promoting some healthy granulation tissue would be the best option now to trim away the barrier, whatever is exposed, or if it's a resorbable barrier, then I would just maybe swab it with chlorhexidine or povidone iodine. Let's say this case were given to you. If this is where we begin, excessive amounts of horizontal guided bone regeneration is required in the maxilla with a significant gain in the horizontal component, or a width gain if you may term it. And this is the amount of width gain, maybe 10 millimeters or more than that of a typical urban sausage graft. Now, if you plan this, and my friend, if you do not plan the soft tissue manipulation prior, believe you me, 100% your bone graft will fail. There is no compromise on that. So we have to plan with the end in mind. We have to plan manipulating the soft tissue accordingly. We have to discuss this treatment option with the patient, because if you manipulate the soft tissue in this kind of a case, obviously you may lose some amount of the keratinized component and you will have to return to correct that. And if you don't discuss that at the outset, it doesn't look good, does it? Where did these cases start? And where are they headed? Immediate implant placement at fault? Yes, obviously. The brunt is borne by the soft tissue? Obviously. And any attempt again to correct this will be a compromise. So when lack of tissue becomes a serious issue, as you can see over here, so then there is trouble. No matter where the tissue is deficient, trouble is always there, as you can see from your screens. What is experience? My boss used to say, experience is something that you get when you don't get what you want, right? So we've all had our stumbling stones. We've all fallen. We've all risen up again. We've all learned to walk. So we know where we are going to stumble again. So that is what you term as experience. You learn as you go. Some of us who are wise enough learn from our neighbor's experience. Some of us who may not be that wise enough learn from our own experience, but we all learn, don't we? So at the outset, let me tell you that we have this kind of a course designed for people who want to learn at Fusion Education. It's all there on our social media platform. All of these cases are there. So please feel free to join up and to register and to share your cases as well. Now let's talk about the aggregate of factors for risk assessment. Your implant design, the implant collar, diameter, surface, 3D implant position, abutment, the temporary, the final crown, the implant placement timing, the patient's biotype, the connective tissue graft. All of these go together in influencing your ultimate soft tissue around the implant. And believe me, when a patient comes to you knocking on your door for an aesthetic zone implant placement, it is the soft tissue which is more important. It's not the bone. The bone is not going to be shown when the patient smiles. It's the soft tissue which is shown. It's the contour which is visible. And therefore, the peri-implant mucosa thickness, and if we bulk that up and if we respect that, if we are careful with that, that's the most important part in the risk assessment. Assessment of soft tissue around your implants is obviously two: qualitative assessment and your quantitative assessment. Okay, so you have to assess the quality of the tissue and you have to assess how much of tissue there is. Like in the sausage graft, the horizontal GBR case which I showed you, if you do not do your quantitative assessment, you may end up with deficient soft tissue to close over that kind of bone gain. And if you do not do your preoperative qualitative assessment, you don't know how much of soft tissue you will lose once you close up over that. So what are the methods to assess your soft tissue around your implants? Direct measurement, visual examination, probe transparency by Delrook et al., ultrasonic devices, and your cone beam CT. If your resolution of the cone beam CT is adjusted, it gives a beautiful picture of your soft tissue as well. So what's the comparison of soft tissue around implants and teeth? There's enough literature. Just giving you one example by Berglund et al. What is the nature of the soft tissue seal on the implant abutment surface? Does the constant biological width of the gingiva apply to the soft tissue as well? Is it important to have a keratinized gingival zone around implant restorations? What's the relationship between the oral bacteria and peri-implant health? All of these are very relevant points when we talk of the clinical soft tissue seal around your implant and the maintenance and the long-term stability of your soft tissue. Because remember, if the soft tissue is not stable, if you've bulked it up and it disappears under stress or under function or under peri-implantitis or peri-implant inflammation or peri-implant mucositis, it's of no good. So continuing with this article, soft tissue around teeth and implants have an epithelial component and a connective tissue component. The epithelial component is very similar in both around teeth as well as in implants. The connective tissue is where the difference lies. The connective tissue around teeth has collagen fibers which are arranged perpendicular cementum surface, and around implants has fewer cells, 3%, more fibroblasts, more collagen fibers which are parallel to the titanium surface. And that is where the soft tissue around the implant is more prone to your peri-implant mucosal inflammation rather than the soft tissue around your teeth, because the cuff, the gingival cuff and the fiber cuff is missing. Although we can argue that yes, we do have newer implant designs like the laser lock implants, which lock in the connective tissue and blah blah blah. All of that is there. The scientific research is there. Histologic studies are there. Yes, agreed. But there is no challenge or no debating this difference between the inherent difference between the tooth and the implant. What is the importance of vertical soft tissue thickness? Now there are two studies, very relevant studies. Biologic width around the implants comprises of three zones: your sulcular epithelium, your junctional epithelium, and your connective tissue. Bear with me, we will come to a couple of clinical slides later on, but if we skip this, the basic and the scientific fundamentals are lost, right? So summing up all these three, the biologic width comes to approximately 3.8 millimeters. That is what we have to play around with, and there are many ways that we can manipulate that. Let's see how we can play around with that. So coming back to vertical soft tissue thickness, this is an often ignored parameter. because people look at the soft tissue thickness on the facial aspect most commonly. On the lingual aspect, maybe in the lower jaw. Have you ever looked at the palatal soft tissue thickness? I would say almost never, because it's almost never deficient. It's almost always there. That's where the keratinized tissue is there in the body, right? So we almost always end up looking at the facial aspect. But Linkevicius, in a study with 56 patients, has reported significant differences in marginal bone loss depending simply on the vertical soft tissue thickness. Okay, and he has published numerous studies wherein platform switched implants were used, non-platform switched were used, conical abutment connections were given, matching abutment connections were given, but in the end, it is only the vertical soft tissue thickness which played a very, very important role. And there are three definitions which he put forth. Thin tissue, less than equal to 2 millimeters. The marginal bone loss was 1.25 millimeters. Medium tissue, 2.5 millimeters, MBL 0.98 millimeters. Thick tissue, the moment you increase 3 millimeters of vertical soft tissue, the MBL comes down to 0.43. So here you see how important the vertical depth is. Then when you talk of bone loss, is it bone loss or is it bone remodeling? This is based on a study of vertical soft tissue again. So bone loss is seen where implants are placed at a crestal level with thin soft tissue. You will see the typical V-shaped unzipping or crater, if you may term it, around the collar of the implant. But bone remodeling is seen where the implants are placed subcrestal, okay, where there is deficient soft tissue, so it remodels and the soft tissue thickness increases. So there it is wrong or erroneous to term it as bone loss. It's better to term it as bone remodeling, because why not loss and why modeling? Bone loss, remember, will not stop. It is progressive. Bone remodeling will go on the moment the biologic width of 3.8 is established. Bone remodeling will stop. What's the clinical significance? Vertical soft tissue thickness should be augmented if less than 3 millimeters using a variety of substitutes, autogenous, allogenic, xenogenic, whatever you want. There may be some patient bias on autogenous removals or xenogenic animal origin substitutes, then that depends on the clinician to use. This may be done at the same stage as the implant placement, depending on the primary stability of the implant, baseline thickness of soft tissue, and all of these. Predictable augmentation of 2 millimeters can be expected using different biomaterials. Beyond 2 millimeters, it may happen. I'm not saying it does not. It has happened in some cases to me, but not in all of my cases. So it's not predictable, okay? When you say it can happen, we are not magicians, okay? We are clinicians. So you're not treating a anecdotal one-off case. You need to be predictable. A tissue thickness of 5 millimeters should be considered as the limit, because more than that predisposes the case to peri-implant disease. Now let's come to a couple of cases. You see a case over here, vertical soft tissue augmentation. Here, the patient didn't want his own tissue to be removed. So we are using a xenogenic soft tissue substitute. Here, we are using Novomatrix from BioHorizons. Xenogenic soft tissue substitute used to augment the vertical soft tissue thickness in the mandibular posterior side. On the left-hand side, you see how thin the soft tissue is. You can almost see the head of the implant. So what we do here is we do a typical poncho technique. We use our xenogenic material and we make two punch holes in it. We connect our gingival formers through those holes so that on the crest, this is stabilized by that. And you just close your soft tissue over it and you see beautiful gain in soft tissue. Now coming back to the point of how you may tackle thin soft tissue, there are a couple of ways. This is a study done by Pusis and Linkevicius. They've given a scheme of implant placement, which if you follow it time after time, you will realize that soft tissue stability is much better in your cases. Now take scheme A. Your soft tissue thickness is vertical soft tissue thickness, let me term it, more than equal to 3 millimeters. So here you can place your implant crestal. Now again, I will again come back to the point which both of these authors have stressed. Regardless of your abutment connection being conical, platform switched, platform matched, blah, 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 if your soft tissue is more than equal to 3 millimeters, soft tissue will be stable if you place your implant at the crestal level. If it's less than 3 millimeters, and at the same time you have more than 12 millimeters of bone to play around with, please go ahead and sink your implants by 1.5 to 2 millimeters. Therefore, what's going to happen? The bone will remodel. You will again end up with approximately 3.8. Or if you do not have more than equal to 12 millimeters of bone to play around with. You cannot sink your implant. Say you are close to a sinus, say you are close to the neural canal. What do? You've got to bulk up the soft tissue. So they've divided it very cleverly into scheme A, B, and C. So placement depth basically indicates your emergence. All of these cases which you see over here, and let me stress, all of these cases, most of these cases which you see over here where you see the emergence profile, these are where the implant depth has been controlled, has been pre-planned, the soft tissue before the start has been pre-measured, so we know exactly which direction the car is headed towards. Now let's stress on a very important topic. I've often seen these two words mismatched with a lot of clinicians saying that I did a CT graft, I changed the biotype. My friend, you can do whatever CT graft in the world. You will never be able to change a person's biotype. A biotype is what we are born with, okay? So there's an inherent difference between biotype and thickness, okay? There's an inherent difference between soft tissue thickness and soft tissue biotype. Tissue thickness can be modified by the clinician. Biotype remains essentially the same. The biotype is assessed principally by way of a scallop, by way of the kind of the square gingival architecture, by way of the stippling, by way of the papillary architecture. There are many ways to assess your biotype. So phenotype versus biotype. Phenotype, any observable characteristic of the organism, whereas biotype is a distinguishing feature of a particular genotype. So basically, biotype is what the individual is born with, all right? Oxenbein and Ross way back in '69 gave two morphological classifications of gingiva, all right? A, scalloped, thin, B, flat, thick. Till date, we see these kinds. Maybe a medium classification has been sort of wedged in between this classification of A and B, but principally it remains the same. Siebert and Linde gave the term periodontal biotype to categorize gingiva into thick, flat, or thin scalloped biotypes again. So what does this do? What does the periodontal biotype do, and how does this affect you? Now, there are different studies which I'm quoting here: Oxenbein and Ross, Siebert and Linde, Becker, Kahn, Claffey-Chanley, Egrea. The classification remains basically the same: scalloped thin or flat thick, thick or thin, flat or scalloped, or pronounced scalloped. Here there are three. Again, thick or thin, thick or thin, thick or thin. So basically, if you look at literature, every author has classified gingiva as thick or thin, or some people have put in a medium in between. They've also looked at the scallop. They've looked at the papillary architecture. And there are certain clinical implications of this. So there was a World Workshop Consensus on Periodontal and Peri-implant Diseases, wherein they suggested the use of the term gingival phenotype instead of biotype. They said that phenotype takes into consideration gingival volume, variations in width of keratinized tissue, thickness of the bone plate, and a host of other things. Now, thick phenotypes showed mild loss of soft tissue and marginal bone loss was less, uncovering for submerged implants. This compared to significant amount of loss which occurred in patients with thin gingival phenotypes. So there's your clinical implications. Clinical implications continue. After the restorative phase, a significant rebound in soft tissue is seen in thick gingival phenotypes. So therefore, many of you who are doing soft tissue augmentation around dental implants or around teeth will see that if you bulk up the soft tissue around your implant or your tooth, you will see a rebound increase in your soft tissue after some time. Whereas a slight rebound occurred for thin phenotypes. So the goal when treatment planning hopeless teeth with thin phenotypes involves atraumatic extractions. The more trauma you induce, the more the bone and the soft tissue will respond in a negative way. All right. You combine it, that is, you combine the extraction either with bone preservation techniques or with bone augmentation techniques, whatever, that depends on your clinical judgment and your preoperative assessment of your case, as well as the use of soft tissue grafts or substitutes. Then what is the clinical sequelae of thin phenotype? Soft tissue recession sequelae, crustal bone loss, increased bleeding, gingival indices, suture line breakdown, unpleasant shadows of the tissue wherein the abutment or the gingival collar or your implant collar shows through the gingival collar. And you see the typical grayish hue which many cases have shown you. So your goal when treatment planning should be atraumatic extractions, bone preservation or augmentation, and soft tissue grafts. Most important 3 points. When you look at a case, an implant case, what do you look at apart from the bone? What do you look at in the soft tissue? What are the characteristics of thick gingiva which show up in a case? Relatively flat soft tissue and bony architecture, dense fibrous tissue, relatively large amount of attached gingiva, thick underlying osseous form, relatively resistant acute to trauma. All of these reacts to disease with pocket formation and infrabony defect formation. So the buccal plate doesn't disappear. It forms an infrabony crater, which is simpler to treat in peri-implant disease as well. And if you look at characteristics of thin gingiva, then what do you see? You see highly scalloped soft tissue, bony architecture, delicate friable soft tissue. You'll see a longish kind of a papillary architecture, minimal amount of attached gingiva. Then thin underlying bone characterized by bone dehiscence and fenestration on the scans. This kind of tissue reacts to insults and disease with gingival recession or even with loss of the entire bone. So now Cao et al. Gave a wonderful differentiation of thick biotype and thin biotype and what is the cause and how does it affect. So if the cause is inflammation, thick biotype, marginal inflammation, cyanosis, bleeding, hard tissue bone loss, pockets formation, soft tissue, redness, gingival, hard tissue rapid bone loss associated with soft tissue recession. To surgery, predictable. Soft and hard tissue contour after healing. To surgery, thin biotype, difficult to predict with healing. Tooth extraction, minimal ridge atrophy, ridge resorption. So these are clinical tips which we as clinicians need to remember and need to incorporate into our treatment plan whenever we are treatment planning it. Let's look at a case wherein we had to bulk up the soft tissue in the vertical dimension. Okay, the top photograph shows you the start. And once the implants are placed, what we do is we get a really good and thick connective tissue graft from the tuberosity, a longish graft, and we place it not on the facial, as you may have seen, but we place it splat on the ridge. Now, what I say next is important. This will not change the biotype, remember, because this has not been done by way of a split thickness flap. This is a full thickness flap which you see here, all right? So this is simply going to increase the tissue thickness. The biotype essentially will remain the same. And by increasing the tissue thickness, what will we gain over here? Because it's an aesthetic zone, so we will better our emergence profile, all right? It's as simple as that. The biotype remains the same. So basically, 5 diagnostic keys to single tooth peri-implant aesthetics: your relative tooth position, form of the periodontium, biotype, tooth shape, and the osseous crest. So remember, when you're looking at your implant case, these are 5 important points which you cannot miss. So diagnostic assessment of a hopeless tooth, you have either favorable or low risk implant peri-aesthetic assessment, wherein the tooth position, gingival form is more, tooth position is more coronal, gingival form flat scalloped, biotype thick, tooth shape square, facial osseous crest position is a high crest, and unfavorable or high risk peri-implant aesthetics, tooth position is ideal, gingival form high scallop, biotype thin, tooth shape triangular, facial osseous crest low crest. How do you apply all of this? You've listened to a lot of science. How do you apply it to your flaps for implants? How do you classify your flaps? Flaps can be classified on the basis of your outline. They can be a trapezoidal flap, wherein you manipulate a soft tissue around your implants. They can be a triangular envelope, papilla protection, and the list is endless. So I'm not talking of flaps today. You can classify it on your direction of advancement, okay, whether it's coronally advanced or it's apically repositioned. You can classify it on the basis of the composition of contributing tissues in the flap, whether it's a full thickness or a split thickness flap. And while flaps are characterized by a functioning network of vessels, connective tissue grafts get their nutrition from plasmatic diffusion, which is very, very important. That is exactly why, even if you remember the previous case which I showed you, before placing the connective tissue graft splat on the ridge, after placing my implants, I have done some kind of decortication, or which is, in other words, where we also call it regional acceleratory phenomena, to get the bleeders out. Where will my graft get its nourishment from? Just giving it nourishment from the mucoperiosteal flap may not be enough. Now, what's your bone response to flap elevation? Stefan Fickel, excellent article. Elevation of both full and partial thickness flaps results in bone loss. Okay, partial thickness flaps can result in less bone loss than in full thickness flaps, but are subject to variability. Yes, they are. Partial thickness flaps is one technique which I can tell you as a clinician. When I was learning partial thickness flaps, I have no shame in saying I ended up perforating some of the flaps. Everybody, we are all human. We are not born like, we are not some kind of a Terminator T100 that we are born with that software encoded into us. We all have our deficiencies, and we all learn down the road. Then there's another very good study by Boozer et al. 2000, where timing of implant placement affects the soft tissue envelope. So they say that if the phenotype or the soft tissue biology of your implant area is thin, then 4 to 8 weeks or early placement post extraction is the best possible option. Why? Because if you see these diagrammatic representations, what's happened in these 4 to 8 weeks post extraction is the bone healing is not complete. See, the bone is healing, but the soft tissue healing is almost there. So what does that give you? If you manipulate your soft tissue flap and if you manipulate your crestal incision positioning in the ideal location, what you will do is you will in reality get a better soft tissue bulk on the facial aspect. So that will help your peri-implant soft tissue aesthetics. Now let's talk about soft tissue complications, anatomic factors, surgical factors, low interproximal height of bone, low buccal crest, thin tissue. Surgical factors most commonly and unfortunately, if I may say, are iatrogenic. So basically, what are your 7 rules for implant placement in the aesthetic zone? Your buccal plate, your soft tissue, IHB, high buccal bone crest at the adjacent teeth. If these are the anatomic factors which you got to look at during your treatment plan and your assessment of your case. When you're doing the case, correct position, adequate incision and exposure, and individually customized emergence profile. You deal with your bone and soft tissue with respect. You respect the tissue will respect you. You disrespect the tissue, you've had it. So if you have to put down a 5-point measurement for flap design in the aesthetic zone, IHB mesial measurement, IHB distal measurement, buccal bone crest on the mesial, buccal bone crest on the distal, and your soft tissue thickness. 5 important pointers. Keys to soft tissue success: never place 2 implants adjacent to each other in the aesthetic zone, okay? Or your inter-implant papilla will disappear. There are people who will argue, what about partial extraction therapy? Yes, that is a newer concept, but when we are looking at these keys, the keys are based on the consensus statements right from the late 90s or early 2000s. Horizontal incisions in keratinized gingiva heal without scars, purulent discharge, tissue chamber technique is always better, fenestration of buccal wall and ice cream cone membrane in the socket, dehiscence of buccal wall. The list is endless. All of this is taught in our courses and our lectures. How to increase your flap mobility. Now, these are 3 important take-home points. Periosteal release will give you a bit extra mobility. I've seen a lot of clinicians talk about periosteal release. I scored the periosteum. Yes, very good. It will give you a bit of extra mobility. It won't give you that excessive mobility which you may desire. Split thickness flap will give you some more mobility to play around with compared to your periosteal release. Mucosal detachment technique will give you maximum mobility, okay? And that is exactly what was used in the sausage technique graft case which I showed you. Mucosal detachment. Similar case, mucosal detachment, all right? Aesthetic zone placement, you see atraumatic extractions being done. You see the amount of graft which has been placed on the buccal. Is there any way possibly that you can get this kind of vertical soft tissue thickness without the mucosal detachment? I do not think so. And what I've done here, a small modification to increase your soft tissue vertical thicknesses, instead of using the cover screw with the implants, I've gone ahead and using the gingival formers, the 3 millimeter gingival formers. So when you close over it, you use it as a tent pole kind of a graft to allow your soft tissue to mature and give you the soft tissue thickness. A very simple technique. The original concept of your flap design was a broad base, okay, allowing many nutrient vessels to proliferate. Milton was the person who gave that. No longer valid. The base need not be broader. The flap length to width ratio can be encroached upon provided the flap in question is a large one, allowing for allied perforators, okay? You have to allow for allied capillary perforators to play a role in the neovascularization of your flap during the healing zone. Now let's come to sutures, which many clinicians have confusion in when dealing with soft tissue. There are people, unfortunately, still using 3O. There are some clinics which give me 3O when I go there. No, wrong suture to use. Please throw it out of the window when you're talking of peri-implant soft tissue. Impossible to use 3O. 6O, 7O, 5O. If you need to come down the ladder, 4O is where you begin to feel uncomfortable. Okay? And there are tension tearing diagrams in this paper, which you should go back and read. 5O and 6O sutures tolerate a mean force of 10 Newton. 7O breaks at a mean force of 3.6 Newtons, less than half. Okay, so what's the clinical implication? What does all this Newton, how does it correlate in your clinical practice? If you use 3O sutures, they will not break, but the tissue will break, your tissue will tear. If you use 7O sutures, the tissue will not tear, the tissue will not break, it will sustain, but the suture will break. That's your clinical extrapolation of this article. Now, many a clinician has a confusion. What should be your timing of soft tissue augmentation? I see so many social media posts. Social media is where some beautiful work is shown, and it is also a digital garbage dump yard. Remember that. So be careful what you see, choose what you see, use your brains. Be like a GPS. Don't go blind. Okay, go guided, but don't go blind. So at the timing of extraction, you can do your soft tissue placement. You can do it prior to implant placement. You can do it after extraction in conjunction with your implant placement with a tunnel technique. You can do before or after the implant exposure with or without the roll technique, or you can even do it after your temporary crown, or when your temporary crown is planned, or when the patient comes back to you a couple of years down the line and you see soft tissue shrinkage. So up to you as a clinician to take the call depending on what you need the soft tissue for. Now, in this case, you see that the soft tissue is simply to correct the soft tissue dehiscence, this little window, which is because of a disastrous implant positioning. We've gone ahead and explanted both these implants, and we've done some GBR. So the soft tissue graft over here is just holding my flap and my GBR together. It's not changing the biotype. So what is the sequelae of tension release protocol? If the flap is advanced over the defect, the vestibular tissue will move coronally, resulting in adequate of attached tissue. Thereby, thin case will compromise future implant placement. So whenever you do a periosteal release, or whenever you do a mucosal detachment, remember, you must be prepared and you must pre-inform the patient that maybe there may be a possibility that we will have to go back and look at it again. So this was originally described by Matthews. Same technique is called MIRAM. Again, I will tell you digital media, good cases, and digital garbage as well. So the original technique by Matthews DP 2005, wherein he has described it as a pediculated connective tissue graft for blown out sockets. Here you see how it's being done, an atraumatic extraction using the Medici Exomed, which I routinely use in aesthetic zone implant cases. A beautiful piece of engineering by Medici. And here you see the pediculated graft which is being used, CT graft. The second case, again a pediculated CT graft which is being tunneled in, complete wound closure, and you see how beautifully it heals. Then you can use a simple, I call it a humble apically repositioned flap. No fancy techniques. You're going to use a flap, right, to expose your implants. Of course, if you don't use a tissue punch, you're going to use a flap, correct? So simply manipulating the flap sometimes, and here I'm using monocortical osteosynthesis screws as soft tissue screws to stabilize and to give you beautiful keratinized tissue, okay? So this actually is a kind of a manuscript which is under consideration for publication, use of soft tissue screws instead of sutures to hold the flap together. Again, the humble apically repositioned flap. Now, once you do this, now as a clinician, it is your call. After I do this, then I take my perioprobe and I measure the facial soft tissue thickness. Is it thick enough? Will it heal with sufficient keratinized tissue? Or do I need to add a FGG onto it? Or do I need to add a biomaterial onto it? This is where my decision comes in. Again, a simple apically repositioned flap. Here we use sutures. So as a clinician, it is entirely your call what you may use. Then you come to a laterally displaced graft, okay? So here there's something different. What we do is, you may term it as a modified apically repositioned flap. Now here the difference is that the distal portion of the flap is attached like with a pedicle, but the entire crestal portion is separated and it's tucked in like an FGG, which derives nutrition from the distal pedicle, and it is sutured and stably secured. Remember, all of these techniques, no matter what you do, if you do not stabilize and position and stabilize your soft tissue component well enough to withstand the forces of function in the mouth, it's not an arm or a leg which you can place in a cast or you can place in a splint and tell the person not to use it. How is he not going to use it? Have you ever seen a patient wherein soft tissue modification has been done, wherein a patient walks out with a nasogastric or a Ryle's tube? Obviously not. He's going to eat with the mouth. If he's going to eat with the mouth, your sutures and your graft has got to be stable. Here you see a partially deepithelialized FGG, a very well-documented technique which has been there for quite some time. So what you basically do is you leave the central portion with the epithelium and you deepithelialize the two corners and you tuck these into the flap which has been created. I'll show you a case with this. Here's a different modification. I just thought of something fancy just on an anecdotal one case basis. What we did was we measured the vertical soft tissue thickness. This was in excess of 5 millimeters. So in any case, we needed to trim it down. So why not use that tissue? Why trim it down and throw it away? So we trimmed it off and we made a little score on the facial and we adapted the same strip on the facial. Your well-documented free gingival graft, split thickness dissection, measure your defect, transfer the measurement to the donor site, secure it well. The moment it is secured well enough, it will give you a fantastic result. Now, if you see, sometimes, even though you've done your measurements well enough, if you look at the mesial corner, I ran short of the graft by approximately 1 millimeter to 2, right? You can see it very well. You can see the sutures which are kind of bridging the gap. In this case, what you could do is possibly you could create a zigzag over here, and you could kind of stretch out the graft by giving those little zigzag incisions. But here I choose not to do that. And you see a beautiful healing in the photograph underneath. And in the same patient, on one side, we did a simple apically repositioned flap, which you can see on top. And on one side, we did a free gingival graft. And the results are here to speak for themselves. You can see the keratinized component beautiful in the FGG. Now, the problem with the FGG is the difference in architecture. You'll basically have the palatal component showing up. So it's not a very good thing to do in the mandibular or definitely not in the maxillary aesthetic zone. Okay. Here you see a case with unfavorable muscle pull, thin tissue biotype, apically displaced flap, FGG, acceptable uptake. And at 4 years, you see a stable graft. Now, what happens to the donor site? A couple of ways. There are numerous ways to treat it. Recently, I've been seeing a couple of posts on social media again, wherein people have placed collagen fleece, that is collar tape, and then covered it with light cure. Personally, I am not a fan of that. I'd much rather use PRF. Here you see PRF for the donor site. It heals wonderfully. Patient comes back within 72 hours. He doesn't even feel an itch on the palate, believe me. And it heals beautifully. In 7 days, the scar is gone. It's finished. You leave it raw, the patient will kill you. Any future appointment, you talk of FGG, believe me, he will start looking for a slipper to hammer you. It's that raw and it's that painful. There are oral bandages, which I have used. They do stay. They are polymer, biodegradable polymeric adhesive bandages. They stay for maybe somewhere between 24 to 36 hours, if you're lucky 48 hours. But then thereafter, the moment they wither away, the pain and the raw area gets exposed, then there's trouble. So I mostly use PRF. If not PRF, then I use collagen tape and I give a stent. Here again, you see the FGG strip graft, how beautifully it has healed up. Aesthetic zone manipulation using a very simple and a humble buccal roll. You see the incision outlined in A, deepithelialized zone marked as B. The deepithelialized zone is tucked in, it is inverted in, okay, A and B here on your screen. So what does this do? This basically, when you tuck it in, it simply serves to bulk up the thickness of the soft tissue. And in that previous case, this is how beautiful it looks at 3 years. This patient actually came back to me because it was a screw retained restoration which had come loose. So I had the opportunity to capture this wonderful image. So you see
minutes, just
yes.
about a couple of more minutes, I think.
Yes. A dual deficit case analysis, young lady in her mid-20s. You see how the tissue is deficient over here. Okay, sequential protocol. I won't go into all of that. Let's come to the soft tissue manipulation. This is how it heals. But still, I am a little wary of the soft tissue. So we again do a little bit of deepithelialization, the buccal roll, beautiful healing with the temporization. And this is the surprising difference on your screen at the start and at the end. Another case wherein we do a partially deepithelialized graft, what we spoke of, tucked in, okay, on both the sides of this patient. Both molars, he received implants. The bone was sufficient. The soft tissue was deficient. Look at how this works out. Yeah, look at how this works out. Beautiful. Will soft tissue tolerate any emergence profile? No, it will not. There are beautiful articles by Linkiewicz et al. I would encourage any and everyone to please go ahead and read the book of Zero Bone Loss Concepts. It's a wonderful piece put together by him. Risk associated with immediate implant placement. Obvious risk, you see, it's way out of the comfort zone. Nothing can be done, okay? Wherein you have to refuse. Sequential protocol in this case, densification, immediate extraction, customized socket seal abutment, beautiful soft tissue. Now here, if I had placed incisions and tucked it over and sutured it up, keratinized tissue will disappear, okay? Again, another case to show you sequential protocol, the pediculated graft. See how beautifully it heals, customized emergence, customized abutment, your aesthetic zone implant placement. A complex case which I would want to take a few minutes to discuss. Heart tissue needs to be leveled for an optimal prosthetic platform at the outset. The keratinized tissue is good, but the moment you do this to level the prosthetic platform, believe me, it's going to be a challenge for you to prevent the soft tissue from riding up. This is the biggest challenge. And what did we do? We used, again, monocortical bone pins to stabilize the soft tissue. This, again, is part of our manuscript which has been submitted. This is once the healing happened. And this is how beautifully the soft tissue, the keratinized component, has been retained around your implants, not with sutures, but with monocortical bone pins. Another case which recently was posted on our Fusion Education social media page, EBF flap, the aesthetic buccal flap to preserve the peri-implant bone tissue. Partial extraction therapy was planned, the EBF flap was planned. So here you see how the EBF flap is, because I felt uncomfortable with the amount of bone on the label, so I wanted to bulk it up. So the EBF flap helps to preserve the papillary architecture. Look how beautiful it looks the moment it heals, and this is your finished case, healthy tissues at 5 months and at insertion of the final prosthesis. This case was completed in these uncertain times. So I don't have any follow-up of this more than maybe a week. Complex maxillary augmentation case analysis, ridge asymmetry. The case was sent to me. Please correct the ridge. Now, if I correct the ridge, what are you going to do about the heart tissue? Sorry, I will place the implants. No, not good enough. You've got to do something about the heart tissue. Sorry, I don't have the skills. I said, okay, then I'll help you to place the implants. Let's do this case together. So this was done with another clinician who learned as the case went by. So we took the case step by step. The heart tissue was leveled off. Again, ostectomy was planned. Again, with the prosthetics at the start, okay? Autogenous bone used, densification protocol used. This is what the soft tissue healing looks like at 10 days, and this is what it looks like at 4 months. Now you've got your prosthetic platform level, but you see gross deficiency in the peri-implant soft tissue. So what we do is we do a soft tissue switch, removal of FGG strips bilateral, okay? Extreme removal of strips, but more from the region where there was excessive, less from the deficit region. This is what I said at slide number 1. It's not always augmentation. Sometimes you need to trim away extra soft tissue as well. So the tissue switch, you move it from the right to the left to the right, and this is how beautifully it heals. If you compare it with your start, this is where you started with, right? So now you have your prosthetic platform good to go. Can I put it all in a nutshell? Very difficult. Well, I'll try to. The first part is in red, correct assessment at the start. Believe me, if point number 1 is wrong, everything else is useless, absolutely useless. Let's not proceed with it. If point number 1 is correct, then this is placed in order of increasing importance. Point number 2, optimal planning. Your planning is equally important. The moment your assessment is good, your plan is important. The moment your plan is important, how you handle your tissue. Okay. The moment you have your skill sets to handle your tissue, then preserve the tissue. Optimal choice of biomaterials. Please do not compromise. Careful attention to the prosthetic contours. Keep ample provision for hygiene and maintenance, because it's not just what you place on day one, it is what he needs to maintain year after year. You're looking at maybe a 15 to 25 years. And enhance your skill sets if required. So at the end, what I would like to say is thank you, Team Famdent. And for those of you who would like to sign up for our virtual course starting October 15th, please, all the details are on our Facebook page. Thank you, Kumaraswamy sir. Thank you, Team Famdent. Thank you, all the people who have worked really hard behind this technical e-conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Yazid. As you stop screen share, may I make a comment?
Yes.
You know, it's seldom, Yazid, that
Yes.
a periodontist and an oral surgeon will see eye to eye for obvious reasons.
It's not the first time that I've heard this. It's not, believe me, it's not the first time that I've heard this.
But with you and your magical skills,
Thank you.
Every time I see your work, I'm simply amazed. Jaw-dropping cases like the last one that you just shared of creating tissue from nowhere. And I'm glad that you spoke to the viewers about the commonness of the suture material choice and the random nature by which they drag it and tear the tissue with absolute scant respect for the soft tissue. All in all, splendid presentation as always. And so proud, Yazid, every time that I invite you and you readily accept and you do wonders.
So it's been a long journey, if you remember, from 2007 to 2020.
It has been. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yazid. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.